Welcome to True Scary Story, where real-life horror stories will send chills down your spine. Do you dare step into a world of unexplained mysteries, eerie events, and terrifying real-life encounters? In each episode, we take you closer to fear itself, uncovering ghostly tales, supernatural phenomena, and haunting truths lurking in everyday life. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story. Get ready to face the darkest fears you never imagined. The road to Black Hollow Cemetery had long since been forgotten. Overgrown weeds choked the narrow dirt path that led into the heart of the woods, where the remains of the town's dead lay in neglect. Few even remembered the cemetery existed, save for the elderly who spoke of it in hushed tones and the occasional hiker who stumbled upon its rusted iron gate, always leaving with a strange unease shadowing their steps. For decades, no one had visited. Families moved away. Records were lost, and the cemetery fell into complete abandonment. The elements took their toll. Gravestones cracked and tumbled. Names were worn away by wind and rain, and the once beautiful marble statues crumbled under the weight of time. The forest began reclaiming the land, creeping vines wrapping themselves around crosses and headstones, while the skeletal remains of trees stood sentinel in the moonlight. Then, on a bitter autumn afternoon, Thomas Grayson arrived. A journalist by trade, Thomas had always been fascinated by places lost to time. A newspaper article had led him here, a small mention of a forgotten cemetery tucked away in the woods of Black Hollow. The piece had been little more than a local curiosity, but it was enough to pique his interest. He packed his camera, a notebook, and a flashlight before setting off in search of the forsaken graveyard. It took him hours to find the entrance. The road leading there was no longer fit for vehicles, forcing him to park miles away and trek through the thick underbrush. By the time he arrived at the gate, the sun was beginning to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the land. Thomas hesitated. Something about the place felt wrong. It wasn't just the state of decay. He had seen plenty of abandoned places in his time, but rather the suffocating stillness that clung to the air. Not even the wind stirred. The world inside the cemetery felt untouched by time, and yet oppressively heavy with it. He stepped inside. The crunch of dead leaves under his boots was the only sound. He walked cautiously, noting the graves with names so eroded they were impossible to read. Some headstones had toppled completely. Others leaned at odd angles like drunken sentinels. A sense of loneliness radiated from the ground itself, an aching sorrow that pressed against his chest. Then he saw it. A mausoleum at the far end of the cemetery, standing defiantly among the ruins. Unlike the other graves, it remained intact, its stone facade relatively untouched by time. Thomas felt a shiver crawl up his spine as he approached. The name above the entrance was still visible, Morrigan. He didn't recognize it, but something about the name stirred unease in him. He pulled out his camera and took a few shots before reaching for the heavy iron door. It was unlocked. The moment he stepped inside, the air turned frigid. The damp scent of decay and earth filled his nostrils, and a deep, unsettling silence wrapped around him. His flashlight beam flickered across stone walls lined with empty alcoves save for one. A coffin rested in the center of the room. It was open. Thomas swallowed hard. The inside was lined with velvet, stained dark with age, but the body was missing. His pulse quickened as he raised his flashlight. scanning the room again. That was when he noticed something carved into the stone beside the coffin. He stepped closer, brushing away layers of dust to reveal the words, "Do not wake her." A gust of air, impossibly cold, rushed past him. The door to the mausoleum slammed shut with a deafening clang. Thomas spun around, heart hammering. He lunged for the door, but it refused to budge. Panic clawed at his throat. He pounded against the iron, shouting for help, but the cemetery remained silent. Then, behind him, something moved. A soft scraping sound, like nails dragging across stone. Thomas turned slowly, the flashlight trembling in his grasp. The shadows in the mausoleum seemed to shift, deepen. The coffin was no longer empty. A figure sat upright within it, a woman dressed in decayed funeral attire, her face obscured by a black veil. Her skeletal hands rested in her lap, fingers twitching. Thomas couldn't move. His breath came in, short, sharp gasps as the figure lifted its head, the veil slipping slightly to reveal sunken, hollowed-out eyes. Lips dried and cracked, parted as if to speak. Then the whisper came, soft, dry, like leaves rustling in the wind. "You woke me," Thomas screamed. Outside, the cemetery remained as it had always been, silent, forgotten. The iron gates stood, ajar, the forest reclaiming the land inch by inch, and the mausoleum